where we are here to help you learn the skills you need to succeed today. And welcome back everyone to yet another lesson in web development. In today's lesson, lesson 7, we'll be focusing on wrapping up this module 2, with our core project. And this is going to be the first part of a 2-part installment. Our follow-up lesson, lesson 8, will be the completion of this module and the completion of the project that we will be working on. Now, I decided to try something slightly different with this lesson to make it a bit more interactive and interesting. And in this lesson, we are going to be working towards building an HR system. Now, believe it or not, for this lesson, we only essentially have one objective, and that is developing an HR system using a case study. So I decided to make this lesson a little more exciting by actually embedding this case study to guide us along the development process of our single page application. Now, without further ado, let's dive in. Now, just for a moment, imagine that you actually work for this company called Joe's Coaches. And what this company specializes in is actually transporting people around the UK throughout the different regions. And let's assume that at this company, you are actually a software developer. Great. Now, meet Joe. Joe is actually the CEO of this company, hence the name Joe's Coaches. And Joe actually stumbled upon this brilliant idea to build an HR system to digitize certain parts of the organization's processes. Let's take a look at the document that Joe actually sent you. So here is just a brief overview of the case study that was drafted by Joe. And you can kind of think of this as a project charter, which means this document is essentially going to guide us in developing the system that Joe actually wants. So let's have a read through it. So Joe's Coaches was established in 2014. The company specializes in providing transport between several national provinces in the United Kingdom. Following the company's successful implementation of an e-commerce platform, there has been significant interest from the CEO to roll out additional technologies to improve the company's processes as well as operations. One such process includes the management of HR data. Ideally, HR management would like a platform that allows the storing of employee data and managing of upcoming interviews. Since a system of this nature comprises of organizational data, it goes without saying that careful thought should always be given to who has access to the platform. As the company's lead software developer, you have been tasked to design the front end of the HR dashboard. According to the project manager, for the first iteration of the system's development, executives are keen to see a functional single-page web application of the dashboard's front end. This implies that the web application must be dynamic so that when tested, users must be able to input data as well as view data. Once the front-end design has been approved, the application will require database integration at some point in the software development process. Below are the requirements for the web application. So let's have a look at the requirements for this project. So our system requirements reads as: the user must be able to add employee data, which includes the following: first name, the last name of employees, the employee's title, the department to which the employee will belong to or does belong to, the employee's email, the employee's salary. And then we've got additional system requirements that we must implement as well. So the user should be able to add upcoming interviews with prospective candidates with the relevant information. Include the UI for upcoming interviews that allows the user to later accept or reject an interview. Ensure that the web application has been built with responsiveness in mind. Excellent. Now that you've actually read through the project charter as well as the case study, you have a fairly good idea of what's supposed to go into the system and how it's supposed to be built. So at some point, you start pulling together your software development team or your project management team in order to better understand the user interface components that need to go into a system of this nature. So after you've met up with your team of software developers, you start pondering on what exactly needs to go into the system as a summary or an overview. Well, the first thing we know is that this needs to be a single page web application. Apart from this, the system also needs to accept interview data, which means user input is required. Apart from interview data, we also need to be able to add employee data. And then lastly, we must ensure that the user interface has been designed in a responsive manner so that users are able to access the system not just from their mobile devices, but from any type of machine. And this includes workstations as well as laptops. Gosh, I know that must have been a lot to take in just to better understand how it is that we're going to be developing this HR system. So without wasting any more time, let's dive right in and let's start coding. Now, you guys know I am a big fan of actually showing you what we are going to be working towards before we actually start working on it. And this is essentially the HR dashboard that we will be building. So if you have a look over here, we've got this card layout for our employees that currently work for the company. And then we've got another card system over here that allows us to accept or reject upcoming interviews. Although keep in mind that these are not necessarily dynamic, so nothing is going to happen if I click accept or reject. Great stuff. What I also want you to take note of is that the website is responsive. So if I click over here, inspect, and the minute I start scaling down the content over here, or even going to mobile layout, the content will adjust accordingly. Okay, and this is what we mean by responsiveness. So let's just close this up and let's actually see how all of this works out. So the first thing I'm going to do is add an employee. I'll go with myself, Lucian, Weingard. I'll add my position as a software developer, and I'll most likely be working for the tech or the IT department. Now I'll just go ahead and add any random email in here, and I'll say test@test.com. And my salary, let's go with something like 25, or let's go with something like £40,000 to start off with. And if I click confirm, you'll notice that my card gets added and I am now a part of this company. So the idea behind this is that this organization can now actually monitor who the employees are, what their positions are, and what their salaries and many other details associated with that employee. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add an interview. Okay. So to do this, I'm simply going to click on add interview, scroll up, and I'll add a department for the individual that I'm actually interviewing. And I will go with something like logistics maybe, because maybe we are interviewing a driver, for example. And then I'll just add driver in here. And then once I click confirm, that gets added to my list of upcoming interviews. Also, do keep in mind that when working through this practical, this is going to be broken up into 2 lessons. This lesson itself, lesson 7, and then our next lesson, lesson 8, is where we'll wrap everything up together. So in this lesson, we're actually just going to focus on the HTML things and the CSS stuff. But for the most part, we are not going to be building our HTML. We will have a boilerplate available to us, and then we'll be working with CSS. And then in lesson 8, we'll finish off with CSS and then wrap things up with JavaScript. So let's dive right into the code. Now, before we start scripting, I want you to take note that I've saved all my content in this folder called L7 on my desktop. Okay, so I've got my images over here and I've got my scripts. Where is this basically stored? Well, this maps out to what I have over here, and this is my directory path. Now, this is the equivalent of what we can actually see in our Atom IDE, and these are the image resources we'll be working with. Now, one thing to consider, and this is something that I strongly suggest, to get the most out of this lesson and to follow along and get the same output that I have, I do suggest that you scale your images to the resolution that I actually have. So what do I mean by that? If we right click on any of these images, head over to properties, head over to the details tab, we can actually see the dimensions of these images. In my case, this one is 84 by 84 pixels. Okay. Now I want you to keep in mind that all of these images that are user images, including the Joe and the default image, are all scaled to 84 by 84 pixels. Okay. The icon 2 image on the other hand is scaled slightly differently. So let's right click, properties, details, and you'll note that this image is actually scaled to 422 by 147. So again, if you want the same output that I'm going to obtain in this lesson, I strongly suggest scaling your images. Great. Again, keep in mind that in the event that you want access to the source code, I will make this available to you via the summary notes, as well as the case study and the project charter, so you can have a good read or good go at it. Great. Now, let's actually start scripting our CSS document. Now, to create my style sheet, I'll simply navigate to File, New File, and then I'll immediately save this so that I don't forget. And I'm going to save this in a folder where my resources are located, in a folder called CSS. And then I'm simply just going to call this style sheet style.css. Never forget the .css extension at the end, else this document will not be treated as a style sheet. Great, so I'll save this up. And then the next thing I want you to take note of is that we are going to be working from a boilerplate, like I mentioned before, and this is what that HTML boilerplate looks like. So let's have a read through this quickly. First of all, I specify my HTML document at the top. In my head tag, you'll notice that I have a couple of elements such as my meta tags. These meta tags over here essentially just allow me to ensure that my website is going to be designed in a responsive manner. I also have the title and then my link to my style sheet. So that's all the data in my head. And then moving on, I've got my body tag over here. And inside my body tag, this is where all the content is. My div tag over here with the nav wrapper is essentially just my navigation bar. And then below this, we have this thing called class employers. This is that holder for where our cards were stored for our employees. And you'll notice that I actually use a list to create this for each employee. This is a list item. Right, and that ends up until here. Then we have that interviews panel with the cards that we actually stored our interviews. And I pretty much did the same thing here with lists, okay? And you'll notice that in this block, in this section over here, we've got things like the marketing, which is the title, the paragraph, the buttons associated with each card, and so on. And that continues as such with the different list items. Then I have this thing called modals. Now, modals are basically just pop-ups, if you will, customized pop-ups. And in this case, I have the employee modal, which allows me to add that employee and the different form elements that go with that, the input elements. And then I also have one for the interviews, because remember, these were two separate modals in the demo that I showed you. Okay, and this basically follows the same logic with inputs and buttons as well. And then finally, at the bottom over here, we just have those two buttons that allow us to add the interview modal or the add employee modal. And then lastly, our script tag at the bottom. This just allows us to embed JavaScript later, which we will be doing in our next lesson. Now that we have all of that out of the way, we can actually start styling. So the first bit of styling I'm going to apply here is just to the body of my website or my web page. And I'll open up by simply calling the body. And then I will set the margin over here equal to auto. Okay, so this will just auto adjust the body or that margin around my body. I'll save this. You'll notice there's not going to be any significant changes to the website at the moment because we haven't really styled anything yet. But this is what our boilerplate looks like without any sort of CSS. Not that appetizing, right? Great. So let's head back over to Atom and let's actually start working on our navigation bar. So I'm going to call my nav wrapper, which is the class associated with my navigation system. Where do I find this? If we head back over to our HTML document, I am essentially just calling my navigation bar, which is this block of code over here. Okay, and you'll see it's contained within a div container. So I'll say nav wrapper, and then I will add a background color of hashtag if. I will then add padding of 5 pixels. Next, I will add a width of 100 to make sure it takes up the entire space. So I'll add this as 100%. I will then make sure that the position of my navigation bar is sticky so that it moves as the user navigates the web page. So I'll say sticky over here. I will then also position this to the top with a parameter of 0. And then I will add a box shadow. Box shadow just allows you to add a nice touch to what the website looks like with that navigation bar specifically. I'll give it parameters of 3 pixels, 5 pixels, as well as 6 pixels. Okay, and we'll have a look at what the output for this looks like shortly. And then the color for the shadow is going to be sort of like a gray, dark, black mix. And then I'll set the Z index to 1 because I want this to be the foremost element in my website. Okay, so let's save this up and let's head back over to our browser and see what it looks like now. So there we go. So we've actually got our navigation bar looking a little better. It does require a bit more styling, like this icon, for example, needs to be smaller. And these links are not very appetizing in terms of the color. So let's go ahead and actually carry on with the rest of our styling. So I'm going to start off by styling my icon. Okay, and this is just the logo of the company. Now, where am I grabbing this from? This actually sits inside of my nav wrapper, and I've given this an ID instead of a class. And I'm going to give this an attribute of max width, and I'll set this to 200 pixels so that it does not extend beyond 200 pixels. Okay, the next thing I want to go and do is sort of work on my nav list, which is the items inside of my nav wrapper. And again, I am grabbing this directly from my HTML code over here. So this is my class. My unordered list is what I'm going to be styling next. So just fix this up. I'm going to give this a list style of none. I'm going to add padding over here with a value of 0. Then I'm going to call display flex so that we can align these properly. And then to further align this, I will call align items, and I will add stretch as the value. Next, I'm going to justify the content so that the space around each link, each href inside of our nav wrapper, those links, they are equivalently spaced away from each other. So space it around, and then I'll call width, and I'll set this to 100% so that it takes up 100% of the viewport. Let's save this and see what we have so far. Great, that looks a lot better than before. Excellent. So we can do further styling on this, which we will do. And the next thing we're going to move on to is the items inside of our nav list, okay? The list items specifically. Now I'm going to call my list items by accessing my nav list, and then by specifying list item at the end of this class, I'm actually accessing the list items and not the nav list itself. So let's just go and edit this. I'll call display inline. I will give this a margin value of 0, and then I'll give it some padding top so we can actually offset it slightly by 26 pixels. Excellent. So after I've edited my list items, I can now go and do some work on the actual anchor tags. So again, I'll call nav list, and I will call the list items, and then inside of the list items, I'm targeting the anchor tags. So I'll call anchor tags, and I will give this a color. This actually has a hex value of 1B9 1db. Okay, let's save that up, and then let's also change the text decoration so we can remove that line. I'll set the text decoration to none, and then I'll give it a bit of padding with a value of 22 pixels. Great, so let's save up and see what we have so far. I'll just refresh this, and there we go. It just looks a lot cleaner and a lot better. This actually looks like a proper navigation system. Now you'll notice we only have a count and logout. This doesn't really matter because these are just dummy links. They don't really do anything in any case. Excellent. So moving on, the next thing we can actually do is work on our employees class. Now to do this, what I need to do is call my employees class, and I'll show you in a second where this is located. Okay. So again, referencing my HTML code, I've got this div container called employees, okay, with a class of employees. Inside of that, I've got my employees list, which we'll also work on in a second. So I'm simply going to just give this a margin value. I'm going to give it a margin left value of a minuscule 1.5%. And then I can move on to my employee list, okay? So let's get working on that list. I'm going to call employees employee dash list, and now I'll add the values accordingly over here. So the first one is going to be the list style, and the list style is going to be none. I'm going to give this a value of padding bottom 10 pixels, and then display inline flex. Okay, this again just justifies and aligns the content beautifully. Then I'll give it a max width of 100%. Next, I'll call flex wrap to wrap around the content correctly, and I will set this equal to wrap. Then I'll call the background color attribute here, and I will give this one a hex value of E, D, E, 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 F. Wonderful. And then two more things I need to do. I need to add a border style to this. And that border style is going to be hidden. And the last attribute I'm going to call here is border dash radius. And I'm going to give this a radius of 10 pixels. Let's save this up and see what we have so far. So let's refresh. And it's starting to come together nicely. Okay, so everything has been aligned correctly, and we have this sort of card behind it. Okay, but we still have tons to do on this particular section of the website. So let's head back to Atom. The next element I want to target now is actually the employee card. Okay, so I'll say employee dash card, and this is just basically that card for each employee. So if we head back over to our index file, we'll notice over here that we have the employees class, inside of that a list, and then each employee has a card associated with them. Okay, you'll find this is quite similar for all of the others. So I actually want to edit this card to make it look a lot cleaner. So I'm going to basically start with display flex again. Display flex, and then I'm going to give this a value of flex. I'll call flex wrap again, flex wrap, and I'll give this a value of wrap. Okay, I'll call background color, and here I'm going to give it a background color of white. Next, I want to hide any borders that might be visible. So I'll say border style, and I will call hidden over here. After I've hidden the border, I will give it a radius of 10 pixels, just to give it that smooth edge. After I've added this, I want to then go ahead and call the max width and set the max width over here to 100%. Excellent. Give it some margin of 20 pixels, and then some padding as well of 15 pixels. And then lastly, I want to give this a box shadow as well, and the box shadow values here are pretty much going to be similar to what we had before. Okay, so I will call 3 pixels over here, 3 pixels again, 5 pixels, and a further 6 pixels. And the shadow is going to be pretty standard in terms of what we had before. Now let's save this up and see what we have so far. So if I refresh, look at that. Now it actually looks like a card, a lot cleaner in design as well, right? Wonderful. So once I've completed that, I can now move on to the user's image. Okay, so I'll simply call dot user img, and I will float this to the left of the container. I will then set the border width equal to 2 pixels. And after I've set the border width, I want to work on the border style. So I'll say border dash style, and I will give this a style of solid and a border radius of 100 pixels. The reason I'm going to actually set this to 100, and yes, it is extreme, is to get that rounded effect of those images. Okay, so then I'll say border dash color, and I will give this a hex value of hashtag 1B91DB. And let's save that up, head back over and see what we have so far. Great, so now it's actually a lot cleaner in terms of the fact that it's actually round. Now it actually looks like a profile image. Let's head back over to Atom, and now we'll start working on our employment details. So I'm simply just going to call that in here, employment, and this is a dash details. And because this is a class, I should never forget my full stop over here. Now, the first thing I'm going to do here, the first attribute I'm going to set is once again my display, and I want this to be of type block. I also want to float this over to the right hand side, and then I will provide it with a margin left of 20 pixels. Let's save this up, and let's do one more thing. Let's actually also work on that interviews element. Okay, so interviews, again, don't forget my full stop, open up my curly braces, and supply the important attributes. The first one I'm going to call is margin, and the margin over here I'm going to set to 1.5% as well, so that it doesn't conflict against the other block that I created earlier. Okay, I'm going to give it a width of 25%. I'm also going to say list style should equal none. I'm going to give this a background color of another hex code, which is EDEEF. Then I will call the border style and hide the border. So I'll say border style, set this equal to hidden. Then I'm going to go and manipulate the border radius and give it a nice round clean 10 pixels. The padding I will provide over here, and this will be 15 pixels. Great, let's save this up and see what we have so far. Let's refresh. So it's coming together nicely, but we still have to extend all of this and clean it up a little. So let's head back over to Atom, and let's work on the list items. So I'm going to call my list item over here. Now this is not an element list item that's built into HTML. This is one that I created. Okay, so if we head over to our index and we run a search on this, we can actually do that because it's going to be a lot quicker. So I'll just say list dash item, and I'll say find, and this is a class inside of my interviews panel. Okay, so I'll just head back over here and let's clean this up, and I'm going to specify over here that I want this list item to have a background color of white. I also want the margin over here to be set to 20 pixels. The padding I'm going to set to 10 pixels, and then I'm going to provide another box shadow over here with the same parameters that we passed in earlier of 3 pixels, 3 pixels on the other side. This one should actually be 5 pixels, and then 6 pixels. And then as before, I'm going to add that dark shadow. Then I'll go ahead and add a border style, and as you know, this one is going to be set to hidden. And lastly, a border radius of 5 pixels. Let's save that up and see what we have. So now my upcoming interviews are starting to come together nicely. We still have quite a bit to do over here. So let's head back over to Atom once again. Let's close this off so we've got more real estate space. Now, before we work on any of our other elements, I actually want to apply a quick fix to our web page. So what you'll notice over here is that my card is not expanding beyond this part over here. Okay, so instead what should be going on is that all my content should be inside of my card and not outside of my card. And this is a simple fix that we can apply. So if we head back over to where we styled our card, here where we have display flex, this should actually just be display. Okay, and then you give it an attribute of flex. So if I save this now and I head back over, everything should be resolved. Fingers crossed, and there we go. Looks much better now. This actually looks a lot more like the final product. Okay, now before we carry on, I do actually want to close the session off over here because we do have quite a bit of content to get through. So with that being said, we'll end off everything with our CSS code over here, and we'll pick up in our next lesson, lesson 8, we will wrap everything up. Now, lesson 8 is going to be a lot more intense because we are going to be adding our JavaScript code as well. Remember, our website does require some dynamic changes. So I hope to see you in the next lesson. And remember to practice, practice, practice. Now that certainly was a jam-packed lesson, but guess what? You are nearly at the end, so don't give up and keep pushing. Now with that being said, well done to everyone who has stuck around and made it thus far. You should really be proud of yourself.